So I wanted to cover just a few basic concepts regarding black and white conversion. I think there are something like 27 different ways you can convert images in Photoshop to black and white. I'm going to show you just a few of them. I'm going to cover sepia toning and duotoning, and specifically the very first thing in your project assignment. Remember, you have 10 total images to submit, and those are the after images. Obviously, we still want to see the before images as well. So the first two are low contrast black and white versus high contrast black and white. And the thing to remember is low and high contrast is not the same as low key and high key. So let's take a look at this image. I'll double click to open it, Command 0 to fill the frame, and looking at it, we can tell that it's flat, right? Ask yourself, is there pure white in this image anywhere? Is there pure black? Let's go up to, let's just hit Command L, which is destructive if I were to adjust anything, but it gives me a quick histogram. And notice there's nothing over here in the light areas, the highlight areas, and the white areas. And there's actually not even any real black yet. It's close, but there's no real rich black. If I hold down the Alt or Option key and click on that black, and if it's totally white in the screen, that means there's no black anywhere. As I come over just a little bit though, I should start to see I'm starting to see a little bit of the black in that left foreground, and as I continue to drag. So an easy way to adjust a low contrast image is just to typically drag whatever slider is missing information to the base of the mountain. Here, I'm not even seeing it until I get inside the mountain a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click over here on the white slider, and notice how everything goes black. And it's not until I start to see some white show up, typically around the base of the mountain. See, there's a couple of pixels up there. So this means I'm clipping everything there to pure white. So I'll probably go to about right there. And then typically you need to readjust your midtones to taste, brightening, and then maybe this needs a little more contrast. Now, obviously this is an inherently low contrast scene, being that it's overcast and foggy. I would suggest that this isn't a good candidate to actually inject contrast into the scene, because the scene itself speaks to the low contrast nature of this, which is 100% okay, as long as that's your intent. And this would be a great example of a low contrast scene. Going back to bridge, here's another low contrast scene. Now let's go ahead and convert that to black and white, and let's hit Command or Control L. But you can't do it while you're on the adjustment layer. All right, so again, typically if it's low contrast, it means it's missing either blacks or whites, and if it's really low contrast, it's missing both black and whites. Another way to reset this, again, this would be perfect for the low contrast image that still has a balance of tones from light to dark. It just doesn't have pure black or pure white, and obviously none of the tones even close to those. Another way to reset this, though, if the goal is to give it an appropriate amount of contrast, like obviously this is shot on a rainy day, it's going to have the same flat overcast light, but here you may not want that overcast tonality and emotional appeal. So instead of dragging your sliders to the base of the histogram, and actually just to make sure I'm teaching you the right way, definitely go into adjustments and apply it as a levels adjustment layer, because this way it comes in as an adjustment and is editable. It's not, let me close this tab group, give me a little more room. So while I'm here, if I click on this black eyedropper, and if you haven't done it yet, reset this. Typically the default is point sample. I suggest going to 3x3 average, because otherwise you could be clicking on a piece of shadow noise, because it's only clicking on one pixel, 1 point. So a 3x3 average is averaging 9 total pixels together to make sure that the area you're clicking on is in fact the area you want to click on. Now, what would be the most black thing here? I could either hold down the Alt or Option key and just drag over and see, okay, it's like the shadows under the shoes seems to be the first area, or I could just say, where would I want my black to be? And so maybe I would go inside the shoe right there, and that's going to recalibrate all the dark tones. And now you can drag that white slider over to the edge, and then, as I said, adjust your gamma, your midtone slider to taste, depending on how much contrast you wanted. Now, if that really rocketed down your contrast too much, you can always pull up your output, like to make the blacks not so rich. But what I'm going to do is go all the way back to the beginning by hitting Command Z, Control Z for PC users. And I want to make sure this is set. I'm going to double click on that eyedropper. Double click it again because the first one didn't work evidently. So this is the default, the RGB values. So you know 0 is 100% pure black in Photoshop and 255 is 100% pure white. So 0 in each of the RGB values means that we're currently at black, which we can verify by seeing where the little circle selector is and where the new and current are. What I suggest doing is changing these values to 7. That's going to still give you a rich black as it will be printed. So it's going to give you some detail in your shadow areas. So now, when I set as new default target areas as the default, yes, and this is going to stay sticky, and it's going to apply for everywhere there's a black eyedropper in Photoshop, like in curves, it's going to have the same settings. So I'm going to say yes. And now I'm going to click maybe in the shadow of that shoe, and if I want to make sure I'm getting the exact space, I'll hit the Command and space bar, zoom in, because I want to make sure I'm clicking right in the deepest part of that. And then I'll hit Command 0. And do you see how this one, whoopsie, do you see how this one has more contrast, but it's not that crazy harsh? Remember, this shadow was pure black a while ago. So this is giving me detail in my shadow areas, which is great. Now double click on your white eyedropper. And again, the RGB values are going to be 255 all the way down. I typically like to go around 247 to 242. You kind of figure out for your own style what works the best. But this is going to give you white with the detail when you reset the points. Yes, I want to change that forever. And what would be white? Let's remind myself. I'll hold down the Alt or Option key and drag over. What is that? Oh, it's the little band in the shoes. Now remember, pure white is typically specular highlight. So you don't want to click on a specular highlight thing. And this, again, why we set the default target color sample to make sure that we're not clicking on a default highlight and we're not making it 100% pure white. So, and I'm going to zoom in again, Command or Control space bar to temporarily activate the magnification tool. I'll drag, and I want to click on the whitest area of the shoe. So I'm going to go into just over 100%. And I'd say of this is probably the whitest area. So I'm going to make that the whitest area of the whole image. And I'm not seeing a shift. Let me go over to, okay, there's the shift. So it's just such a small shift. I don't even know that you'll be able to see it on the video. For me, I still want it to be a bit more white. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this over to about there and brighten that just a touch. And again, we started here. And let me turn on the black and white there. And here's the levels adjustment. So the first one is low contrast. This would be low contrast. This would be normal contrast. And then obviously a high contrast image is something that has deeper blacks and whiter whites. So I'm sure you get that whole concept. So let me show you, don't save. Let's go to a sepia tone. So here's another low contrast image that we can quickly take a peek. Yep, there are no blacks, no whites, so maybe the shadow area is there. I'll pull this over, slide that, and obviously we want to make it black and white. Now we need to convert it to sepia. There's a lot of ways to do this. So inside of the black and white adjustment layer, you have the ability to tint an image, and you can adjust the individual color channels of that tint. You can double click on the tint and pick your more favorite value, whatever it is that you like, to further customize it. And then since we have actually, watch what happens if I lower the opacity here. See, it's going to go back to the color. So in this instance, if you want to adjust the intensity of this this tint, you would have to actually have two adjustment layers for black and white. So I'm going to pull this one to the bottom. So now the black and white adjustment layer that's on top with the tint, I can lower the opacity and it's going to fade the intensity of that color down to the black and white adjustment layer right below it. So this is a great way to get sepia. But I'm going to undo that. I'm going to show you another way. So let's go ahead and add our black and white adjustment. Now, what I'm going to do, instead of using the black and white adjustment tint, and obviously you have some presets you could use, instead I'm going to go over to the hue and saturation adjustment layer and click colorize. This is one of my favorite ways because I like to jack up the saturation so I really see the color, and then I can just quickly dial in the exact sepia, the amount of warmth that I want. If you want to make a cyanotype in future stuff, obviously you go this direction. But let's say I really love that warm brownish sepia. Then obviously I'm going to pull that saturation slider way back until I get the right intensity. You see why I like this a little better, because I can do it all in one dialog box. I can adjust the intensity of the color and how much of a color saturation intensity is affecting my image. So this is a pretty quick way to apply that. So I'm going to get out of that, and then let's go back up to adjustments, and let's go to the photo filter icon. So here's the photo filter icon. I'm going to click it. So here's the warming filter, and you have all of these. You can actually, again, go check. Now this one is also nice because notice I can control the intensity of the color right here with the density slider, and as long as preserve luminosity is checked, I'm not going to contaminate my highlight details. So this is another nice option for achieving that sepia tone, which is one of your project requirements. Now let's look at how to create a dual tone. And for that, I'm going to go into Adobe Camera Raw. I think I'm going to do it with this image. Oops, I double-clicked on it. So remember, if you double-click on an image that's a JPEG, it's going to automatically open in Photoshop because that's the default settings. However, if you select an image that's a JPEG and you just come over here to this little icon, or you hit Command-R for Mac, Control-R for PC, or choose this icon, it's going to open that JPEG into Adobe Camera Raw for you. Let me make this dialog box smaller. Inside of the Adobe Camera Raw, we have some pretty powerful conversions. Now, obviously, we can just jump right to black and white, and then we can come over to the split toning tab right here. It's the fifth one over. And again, I'm going to drag the saturation way up. And for me, I love to have warm highlights, something like that. And then I'm going to pull that saturation back down so it's more subtle. And then for the shadows, I like to have kind of cool shadows, something like that. And then I'll pull that saturation way down. And then we can shift the balance, whether we want it to be more predominantly shadow-based duotone or highlight-based duotone. So obviously, since I've set my highlights to being really warm, dragging the balance over here is going to make it a warmer with still blue undertones. Now, what's interesting is as you adjust this balance, you can then say, well, let me come back and make my blues a little stronger, even though they're not as predominantly in the scene. This is probably the quickest and best, most powerful way to make a dual tone. And so I would encourage you to experiment with that. And remember how all this works. If you click Done, it's just going to apply these settings to the image, and you'll go back to Bridge. If you click Open Image, you'll then pop into Adobe Photoshop to be able to edit this. If you hold down the Alt or Option key, it's going to change this to open a copy, which will literally duplicate the image on your hard drive once you save it again. Because unlike Lightroom, which saves virtual copies, this is actually really duplicating. And if you hold down the Shift key, then it's going to open it as a smart object. So you see how that changed to open object. And as always, remember, this is your workflow options that you already picked up if you watch the Adobe Bridge video right above this one. All right, so I'm just going to click cancel because I don't need to apply that duotone. I just wanted you to see it. So here's a high contrast image. If I go up to adjustments and I just take a peek at the levels, yeah, we can see that is pretty high contrast. You know, actually, I think this will be interesting. Let's pop over to Adobe Camera Raw for this image to see if I wanted to bring back some of those highlight details. I can. So I can soften that contrast, but it still comes off as a high contrast image. So sometimes high contrast doesn't mean 100% blowing out the white areas of the screen, but sometimes it's a very dramatic tool. So here I could even soften those highlights, and I could still have a high contrast image, but it's not like stark. So think of the refinement and the subtlety of the applications that you use. So I'm gonna click cancel. So local color contrast adjustments. Let's start by just double clicking to open this in Photoshop, Command or Control 0 to fill the screen. And what I'll do is, actually I don't like my adjustments being, I don't like to have to keep clicking on that. I want to make that the first tab, so I just drag it over. So let's say I go ahead and make this default black and white. And now what color was the Volkswagen? It was red. So notice as I grab the red slider, I can adjust. It's like being able to mathematically dodge or burn, depending on the direction I want to pull this scene. But let's say if I want to pull it, make that the bug a little brighter, that's all I have to do. And then I can, let's say I want to add another adjustment layer, and I can pick anything. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to do anything with these sliders specifically. I just wanted a different layer so that I could apply a blend mode. So let's say if I chose multiply, I like that blend mode. And then I'll hit B for brush, right bracket key to make my brush size a little bigger. The bracket keys are beside your letter P key. Now notice up here I'm at 100%. If I tap 5, that'll go to 50%. And that's going to let me subtly dodge this out as I paint on the mask, but it's a white mask. So I've got to make sure I'm painting with black in the foreground color. So if I just hit X, it will quickly swap those. And now I can increase this brightness by 50%. I'll make my brush bigger. Remember, your brush goes about 50% larger than the brush you're actually seeing. So this will help soften it up even more. And maybe I'll type 0 for 100%. And I want to bring this back as much as possible. And then I'll tap 2 for 20%. And maybe it's like that vignetting is a little harsh. Let me soften that up. And now after I've done all of that, maybe I do want to come over to, let's add an adjustment to the curve just to give it, I'll pull down the shadows a little and pull up the highlights a little, just to give it a little tweak of entire global contrast. So we locally adjusted the subject's contrast by using the color channels, but here, but it still needed a little bit more refinement based on the vision of the things that I wanted to show. So if I hold down the Alt or Option key and click on this eyeball and then release it and click on that one. So here's where we were, and here's where we came. So this is a good way to adjust the local colors inside of an image in Photoshop. Let me show you how to do that same technique in Adobe Camera Raw. So here in Adobe Camera Raw, if you come over to the 4th tab, it's the HSL adjustment, and this is a bit more time consuming, as you will see, because essentially you've got to just drag them all down. It's a really interesting way, though, to create some very quick spot color. Now I'm going to pop over to the Luminance tab and try to mimic the same effect. Like I want to bring that up. Maybe I'll bring my oranges up and my yellows. Now you see how, notice the difference in the sliders. Notice how they're more subtle in these adjustments, whereas in the Photoshop they were a little bit more heavy-handed. But it's also not taking it quite as far, right? So then I can also, in here while I'm in RAW, I now have all my other sliders. Like I can pump up the clarity, which is going to inherently boost the contrast. Maybe I want a little texture in this. Do I want to give it a little bit more mood by trying to dehaze it? And then I still have all the other stuff. Like here I can just grab this radio filter and click once on the exposure tab to underexpose the whatever circle I draw by half a stop, and that recalibrated all the other sliders right away. So I'm just going to say apply this effect to the outside of the circle that I draw. So notice how it's specifically, it's not making my car lighter, it's specifically just making everything on the outside darker. And then let me check my feather. I can feather that effect so it's a little more soft. I can really go crazy, right? Do you see how you have an adjustable vignette now? So that's really powerful. So I think that's a nice effect. Make sure I don't pull out any highlights, but maybe I want to pull my exposure up just a touch. So this is another pretty powerful way for locally adjusting your subject image's contrast. And this, you can do it all in one pane, basically one panel, which is really nice. This is coming over to Adobe Camera Raw is where I like to go most. And again, if you're already a Lightroom user, then just use Lightroom for this. Cancel. All right. So I want to show you something now. I'm going to open this image, double click on it, and I'm going to open this image, and I'm going to show you something. Let's say, like, as a photographer, you come up with like your favorite adjustments. So you like to go to black and white, you like to add a hue and saturation layer, and let's say you're going to print and show these images side by side. So you choose your color, you choose your intensity, and right away, to make sure that you have this exact same color that will match when you print on, say, this image, well, all you have to do is Command or Control click on those two layers. You can actually name them, you can push them together as a group, and oopsie, I did it twice there. Double click to rename, say black and white and sepia. So I can now drag this adjustment layer, just click and drag over to the tab where I want it, pull it down into the image and let go. And notice it instantly applied the exact same black and white and sepia adjustment super quick. So you can actually create this as an action that we'll cover later in the semester, which is covered very specifically in Photo 1120 now and Photo 2120, because actions are a big time saver for professional photographers. And this kind of aligns with the presets in Lightroom, kind of the same functionality. But it's a very quick way to drag your adjustments from one to the other. So let me not save those, go back to Bridge. Okay, so some other ways to convert to black and white. A good way, which is pretty powerful, is to apply a gradient map. This very last icon here, let me pull this up. Now, obviously, this is auto-selected some other gradient I've used in the past. The default should be your foreground to background. So I'm going to click that. Now, this isn't a great example. Why? Because it's already in color. So let me pull over one that's not and do the same thing. So you see how it gives it this wonderful gradient to the image. Now, the thing that I want to show you, though, I'll go back to the black and white one just because I like this image. The gradient map has, and Photoshop overall has a ton of features that are buried, and you can't quite see them. Like, let me, right here on this gradient map, as I select that icon the most, so as the white brackets around it, if you look up to the properties panel, notice the underlines here, the three underlines. If you click those, well, that's not going to help. What's the best way to get there? That's the best way to get there. Double click on the actual gradient so that it will bring up the gradient editor. These are the default gradients we saw just a moment ago. This is what Photoshop automatically loads. And you got to wonder why. Like, who's going to ever use orange and yellow as a gradient? But again, they're trying to just show you some options. But there's actually a ton of buried gradients that are beautiful. If you go into load, you can load your own gradients if you want. But if you go to this gear icon, notice all of these: color harmonies, 1 and 2, metals, neutral density, noise samples, pastels. This is the one. Adobe actually hired master printers to create, well, let me stop for a sec. Do I want to replace the gradients with the gradients from photographic toning? That's saying, do I want to erase all these defaults and apply these? And if I click OK, that's what's going to happen. But if I click append, it's just going to add them to what's already there. So what Adobe did is they hired master printers to essentially create the exact tonal quality of all the darkroom chemical processes, from cyanotypes to sepia toning to duotoning, in the varying degrees. Like if you left your paper in the sepia toner for 10 seconds versus 1 minute, you get different intensities of sepia. So here you just kind of click and find the one that you like, and it's already mapped for you across the entire range of your image. How powerful is that? Now, let me show you something even more crazy. Like, so that you don't have to randomly go in and click and drag and figure out, which one you like. I mean, once you find your favorites, you're going to have them. But let me show you another way. So I'm going to go back here. Julianne Cost, amazing presenter. If you don't follow her, you should. She's worked at Adobe for like 25 years. I think I've watched her present out in Las Vegas and Los Angeles for the past 15 years, like every single year. She's really funny, but more importantly, her technical know-how is just spot on. So what she did is she went and created an image, and this is at 28%. Let me zoom in just a touch so we can actually see what's going on. So she created an image as a smart object with all of the, I'm holding down the space bar so I can turn my tools temporarily into the hand tool so I can move it around. She created a smart object and then applied each individual gradient to that same object, because obviously maybe you don't know exactly which one you want, right? So watch this. If I click into this image right here, it's titled Lighthouse, but that's it. After editing, comments, choose file and save, because remember, whenever you're opening a smart object, which is indicated by this little icon right here, it's going to open as a second file right to the right of this as a PSD document. So I'm going to click OK. So I'm sorry, the PSB document. So, and here's the image that was being toned. Now notice it has some transparent areas above it, and that's only because it's kind of prep for whatever size image you put into this. So if you go over to the right side of your image, right click and choose replace contents. That's what this says. It falls offside the viewing window, but replace contents. The bad part of doing it this way is it's going to quickly bring you into your operating system's file browser, which obviously isn't ideal because, well, you weren't able to filter anything. The icons are super small. You may not remember what the name is. All right, so let's replace this one image. I'm going to come over here to this image, and I'm just going to grab it, drag it over to the tab where I want it to go, pull inside the image area and let go. And it's going to say it's going to convert it. Is this okay? I was like, yeah, that's fine. Now notice it came in super large. Let me show you how to quickly fix that. If you hit the Command T, which activates the free transform, Control T for PC users. But obviously the image is so big, we don't even see the bounding box. We don't even see a corner to grab. But if you hit Control or Command 0, that's going to fit in window, whatever's going on. So if you've activated a Control T, it's going to show you the bounding box. Now, I see some students kind of pulling in like this. But remember, if you just hold down the Alt or Option key, it will come in from the center. So I'm going to make this one, I'm going to pull it out from the center. There we go. Now click Enter, fit the screen. So now watch this. When I click the X, it's going to say, do you want to save this? And I'm going to save this as a smart object that's going to be inside of this smart object. It's like Inception, layers within layers, dreams within dreams. And now it's applying all the other gradient filters to it so that you can very quickly see, like if you have an image that you really like, and you're like, I wonder which gradient map tone would look the best with this image. That image has been applied to everything. So we can see the cyan and sepia mix, the red and yellow mix, the blue-yellow mix. You kind of see what I'm talking about. It's applied it to every single option in the gradient map list. So this is really nice. I'm going to attach this smart object color toning so that all you have to do is replace the smart object with whatever image it is that you like to be able to see it very, very quickly. Remember, Photoshop applies everything at 100%. So it's basically like choosing a radio station, but it's at max volume, which is always going to be too much. Well, typically always going to be too much. So when you see these color saturations that are just so ridiculously overwhelming, remember you still have the ability to lower the opacity. So if I go like to row 1 and I lower the opacity down to 0, do you see how it actually is fading out? But watch what happens if I go in to that row and I choose one. It's like, well, I really like this one, but I don't like the intensity. See this upper right corner, but I don't like how intense it is. maybe I'd like that at 50%. So this way you can go in and individually choose, like, okay, I think I like this one. And as long as I choose the move tool by hitting the V key and make sure auto select is on, if I click on this image, it's going to take me all the way down and auto select that image. So that's the JK red yellow, which is what that adjustment layer is. So I'm just going to click that adjustment layer. It's like, what does that look like if it were at like 50% opacity or 25% opacity? And you see that's much more subtle and has much more, I think, integrity than the very heavy-handed stuff. So remember, Photoshop blasts you with 100% volume maxed out. You've got to almost always drag the opacity of the adjustment layer down so that it's a more appropriate adjustment. These are just some small tips to get you going. Hopefully you've picked up something new that might benefit you. And I look forward to what you create with your monochromatic shots. Take care.